Goedenavond, bonsoir, good evening. Ik moet Paul Dujardin, directeur van BOZAR, hier verontschuldigen. Ik zal dus zijn woorden uitspreken. Vandaag stellen we een nieuw boek van Guy Verhofstadt voor. En hoe kunnen we dat beter doen dan met een debat? Het wordt stilaan trouwens een mooie traditie. Eind 2012 presenteerde Guy Verhofstadt samen met Daniel Cohn-Bendit, die toen nog zijn collega was in het Europees Parlement, hier het manifest voor Europa, debout l'Europe. De titel van het huidige boek klinkt iets minder optimistisch, de ziekte van Europa. Guy Verhofstadt werpt daarin een blik achter de schermen van de Europese macht en formuleert voorstellen om de huidige crisis het hoofd te bieden. Daarnaast bevat het boek ook een reeks anekdotes en verhalen waarvoor Verhofstadt put uit zijn jarenlange ervaringen in de toppolitiek. En het is blijkbaar het Europese boekenseizoen, want op 28 oktober is Herman Van Rompuy hier de gast met zijn nieuwe Europa-boek. En dat zal na de storm hoe we de democratie in Europa kunnen redden heten. Ziekte, storm, uitdagingen, reddingsoperaties. De Europese Unie beleeft inderdaad woelige tijden. Het is dus ook alle hens aan dek en het gevoel van urgentie is groot en terecht. Onze Europese gemeenschap vraagt om betrokken en visionaire beleidsmakers en denkers om het schip op koers te houden en om oplossingen en ideeën voor de toekomst aan te dragen. Elk met hun eigen temperament, ervaringen en inzichten. Pourquoi une maison culturelle telle que BOZAR accorde une place importante aux présentations de livres et aux débats de penseurs européens? Parce qu'une maison culturelle est l'endroit rêvé pour accueillir un débat ouvert et contradictoire. Un endroit où il est possible d'être fondamentalement en désaccord et où les différences sont justement célébrées. Parce que le Palais des Beaux-Arts, en tant qu'institution fédérale culturelle, possède une mission et vision européenne très nette et bien assumée. BOZAR devient de façon de plus en plus proéminente une maison de la culture européenne. Et ceci en offrant une place de premier rang aux artistes, à l'héritage européen et aux échanges artistiques à travers tout le continent européen. Situé au cœur de la capitale des institutions européennes, BOZAR crée un espace, un agora, de débat où les artistes, penseurs et entrepreneurs et hommes politiques peuvent se rencontrer et s'inspirer mutuellement. De ware utopisten, mensen die de toekomst radicaal anders durven denken, zijn kunstenaars en jongeren. Ik geloof dat Guy Verhofstadt altijd wat van de Sturm und Drang heeft behouden. Hij heeft ook een boontje voor tal van kunstenaars, wetenschappers en schrijvers die zijn gedachtegoed voeden. And then a bit of commercial for ourselves. November will be a truly European month in the Center for Fine Arts. I would just like to invite you to the Journée de Bruxelles on the 18th and the 19th of November, where we will invite top European politicians on this stage. Ik wens u alvast een boeiende avond toe. Je vous souhaite une très agréable soirée. I wish you all a very pleasant evening. Et je donne la parole à Béatrice Delvaux.
Welcome everybody. So we will be very European because we will switch from one language to the other, French, English and Dutch. And so we are going to make it happen tonight. Few practical informations. The hashtag is Verhofstadt or hashtag Cure Europe, the two work, excuse me. And I would say each time Guy Verhofstadt goes public, it makes the buzz. We all remember his famous intervention during the summer when he addressed Mr. Tsipras about the failure of the Greek governance and the lack of willingness to reform his country. Last week, when Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Hollande were in Strasbourg, he pointed the extreme right political parties on their criticism of Europe being responsible for all the crises that endures. Mr. Verhofstadt pointed that it was nationalism and not Europe who was the cause of the 20 million of deaths during the 19th and the 20th century. 2 years ago here, in this Salon Rilebeuf, it was the launching of the book co-written by Mr. Verhofstadt and Mr. Cohn-Bendit for Europe, which attracted the crowd. And there is the new book, De ziekte van Europa and de herontdekking van het ideaal, published by the BZKB, but as he is going to explain you are here present at the launching of the worldwide tour. He's going to tour a lot of countries, a lot of book handles, but also is trying to make of this book something else. He's going first to explain us, and then we will ask him questions. To debate with him tonight, we have three prominent analysts of the European affairs and European politics. Ryan Heath, who is a senior EU correspondent, writer of the morning playbook column at Politico. He was a spokesman of Neelie Kroes, so he knows Europe very well, from the inside, from the outside, and as an Australian immigrant at the beginning, and as American regard at Europe. Bruno Waterfield, if you look at his Twitter account, it says, bursting the Brussels bubbles from the Times. So after being also a European specialist at the Telegraph, he is in Brussels since 2003. So he follows European affairs since almost 2 decades. Yves de Smet, former editor-in-chief of the Flemish-Belgian newspaper De Morgen, senior writer, opinion maker, but should I say he's also here as a psychologist because he knows the Verhofstadt case very well. Yves, you will have to help us to understand if Verhofstadt is more than a buzz, and what is his passion coming from, and why is he still now writing books now about Europe, and what is his crusade? So you know him since the beginning of his political career. You followed him as a president of a political party, the Liberal Party. There are a lot of eminence of this party here in the room, but also as a prime minister and now as a fighter for Europe. But first of all, because you haven't read the book, I have, but we are very few because it's just published today. So you are going to introduce us a bit in your word, in your ziekte van Europa. What is the ziekte van Europa? We'll listen to you for a few minutes.
Thank you, Beatrice. First of all, thank you all for your presence here in BOZAR. It becomes a tradition, I should say, that BOZAR is hosting the launch of pro-European books, but this is a little bit a strange pro-European book because the title is not so pro-European. It's about the disease of Europe, Europe's disease. And the reason why we have used this title, de ziekte van Europa in Dutch, is because Europe has a disease. Europe is in problems, in huge problems. We are not capable to solve the financial crisis, the euro crisis. The Americans are now already discussing how to stop the overheating of the American economy. They have solved their problems, and we are still in the middle of this financial crisis and this euro crisis. We have, in the meanwhile, a huge refugee crisis in which it's a shame how Europe behaves itself towards most of these refugees, and we are not capable to manage this properly. And at the same time, we have a geopolitical crisis in Europe, not capable to manage or conflicts at the outside borders of Europe, in Syria, for example, but also in Ukraine and in many other places. And what I have tried to explain in the book is what is this disease? What is happening? How it is not possible in the 21st century, in fact, to do what the founding fathers of the European Union had in mind. And what they had in mind was not a loose confederation of nation states as it exists today. That is what they had not in mind. What they had in mind was a European political federation from the beginning. And so in the book, what I'm trying to do, there is an annex in the book, and that annex is the first European constitution that has been approved by the representatives of the 6 member states in 19 1953. I'm born in 53. It's no coincidence at all, naturally. But it's exactly in 1953. After the coal and steel community, they immediately had the idea to launch a European political federation, including a European government, including a European Parliament directly elected, including a Senate of the member states, including a serious budget, including everything, including a defense community. And it's because this defense community was not accepted in 1954 by the French Parliament. It was under the leadership of Pierre Mendès France. It was not his idea, and it was from his predecessor, so he was not interested to pick up that project and to push it through the French Parliament. The French Parliament decided in 1954 not to adopt a defense community. And the consequence of it was that the whole European Constitution of 53 that was accepted by the 70 representatives by unanimity and 5 abstentions, not bad, huh? Unanimity and 5 abstentions. I never got a unanimity and 5 abstentions for whatever project in Belgium, but okay. It was a unanimity with 5 abstentions, and it was approved by the 6 member states, and then failed in the National Assembly in France. And because of the fact that the defense community was not accepted, the founder said, yeah, it's not necessary to have this European constitution, this European political union, this European political community. And then they went to Messina and to the Treaty of Rome and so on. So everybody today, the political establishment in Europe, explains to you that it was a huge success, the European Union. It started with the coal and steel community, and then we got the Treaty of Rome in 1957, and so on, and then the internal market. In fact, it was a failure, because what the founding fathers had in mind to do didn't go through. And came then later on Charles de Gaulle, the Luxembourg Compromise, and the need for unanimity. And since then, we live, in fact, in the European Union, mainly a loose confederation of nation states in which every important decision has to be taken by unanimity. We are very strange animals in Europe. If the treaty says that you need unanimity, we look to escape to the unanimity by an enhanced cooperation, on an intergovernmental cooperation outside the treaty. And when the treaty says, no, you need only a qualified majority, then we say, no, we're going to try to have unanimity, nevertheless. So imagine a little bit how it can work. It cannot work, and it shall not work. And the refugee crisis, and the euro crisis, and the economic crisis, and the geopolitical crisis are proof of that. Because we are managing the European Union in a way that, as the Americans should ask for the approval of the 50 governors of the US before taking a decision. You can imagine that the 50 governors of the US should every time, when they take a decision about the dollar, about the economy, about geopolitical question, there should be an approval by the 50 governors of the United States. And that, for example, a state could say, wow, the FBI, that's not my stuff. I'm not going to participate in the FBI. That's just an home affairs. I'm going to do it separately. Or that, for example, another state is saying, well, the dollar, yeah, I live in California, maybe. I don't like the dollar. We're going to go back to the Spanish peseta or something like that. That was until 1850 a currency in the United States competing with the dollar. And that another is saying, yeah, the American Coast Guard, so protecting our borders. Wow, I'm a Midwest state, I shall not participate in that. Everybody should say, they are crazy, these Americans. Well, it's exactly the way we are doing it in Europe, by making it not possible to have, for example, an external border control together. Now, that's still the 28 member states who are responsible. And by allowing that member states can opt in, opt out. At the end, I have put in the book also a number of slides to explain you the European Union. And I needed at least 10 slides for the the 10 different European unions that exist today, but there are in fact more. So the editor said it's enough, 360 pages now, enough annexes. So I limit myself to 10 slides. But in fact, there with opt-ins, opt-outs, earmarks, derogation, enhanced cooperation, intergovernmental cooperation, Schengen, the euro, a European patent, just an moment, it's all different. It's à la carte. So normally you go in a restaurant, and then you have 2 menus. Well, here it's à la carte, from the beginning to the end. You take what you want. And so what I'm trying to explain that this Europe cannot work. Cannot work, and we need to make a leap forward, and why not? Our founding fathers, they got the answer to these problems. You take the Constitution of 1952-53, and you read it, and then you're going to see, oh, there's my instrument against the euro crisis. That's an instrument against the refugee crisis. They are already foreseeing, for example, a full membership for most of the country and an associated membership for Britain. That was all foreseen in this constitution. Even Britain was not a member, not even trying to become a member of the European Union. They got already a solution for that problem because there were full members and associated members. Not 25, 28 different statutes for the 28 different countries of the Union. So what I'm hoping to do now with this book, because I think that because of this crisis, refugee crisis, euro crisis, everybody and most of the people are saying, yeah, Europe doesn't work. And they're right when they're saying Europe doesn't work. But automatically, they fall into the trap of nationalists and populists who are saying to them, well, Europe doesn't work. Yeah, it's true, Europe doesn't work. Well, it can work if we're gonna back to protect ourselves behind our national borders. Nationalists are explaining to the public opinion that climate change is going to disappear, the euro crisis is going to disappear, all refugees are going to disappear in Europe, that problem going to disappear. At the moment, if we go again back to the old-style nation-states and we go back to the old-style national borders. The reality is completely the opposite. These problems shall not disappear. What we need is to reform this Europe, but to reform it in a fundamental way, not step by step. The step-by-step approach, we have now already 60 years of step-by-step approach, and it doesn't work. We need, for once and for all, a huge reform of this. And what my idea is with this book is, we're going to publish it. It's now in Dutch. In February, March of next year, it's in French, with plomb, that it's going to be published. Then in America, we have an American editor with the Perseus Group, Basic Books, is going to make the English worldwide and American version. And we are in contact, in discussion, in debate with Italian and German and Spanish editors. But the main reason why I started this book is I want to make something else. I want to make a film of it, a television series. I want to spread it to the public opinion because, okay, whatsoever people that going to be, let's hope that thousands and 10,000s of these books are sold, but the main point is how you reach the public opinion. Yeah, we have social media. Yes, 9 million people have seen the YouTube film with Tsipras, and now 1.5 already again with Merkel and Hollande. But to really go into the heart and the minds of the citizens in Europe, explaining that a jump forward, a revolution on the European level is needed. We need to create a public opinion. And it's gonna not be our national political leaders who are gonna create the public opinion. We have to do it with the citizens ourselves to create this public opinion. And for that reason, I wrote this book as the start of a script. But as always, first the book and then the script, and not the opposite. So I hope that you like it. I hope that you can also all read it. It's mixed also with a number of personal experiences, going into the Dutch of Putin, and then seeing Mr. Orban for the first time in my life in '89, going into the White House with Bush, who started then the Iraq War, and why he did it. All this experience are in the book, and I hope that you like it and that you agree with me that the most important of the cover is the second title, The Rediscovery of the Ideal, de herontdekking van het ideaal. Thank you very much for your presence.
So we will go in depth on the different chapters, from the disease to the cure. But a first question is, so we were here with Yves de Smet years ago for the presentation with Daniel Cohn-Bendit and yourself for Europe. And it was, in fact, I think, the same idea, the same ideal. It was also a fight for more integration, for the big step forward. It was before the elections. So there is a sense maybe of déjà vu in the... No. Sorry, I'm going to take it. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's the Socialist Party symbol, but okay. Thank you.
So.
The difference.
No, there is a sense of déjà vu. So what is the difference? What is new with this book that wasn't in the book with Cohn-Bendit?
Oh, I think that
except that you are on your own touring.
Yeah, but it was a manifesto, the book with Danny. We didn't explain many things, and the proposals were also limited. Here, I tried to do the rediscovery of a fantastic piece of a constitution, and certainly, secondly, also to describe in a more comprehensive way, I think, all the problems, the disease of Europe. This, you're gonna see it. It's a crisis on economics, a crisis on governance, it's a crisis on our moral attitude. If you look to what happened with Orban and in Hungary, and the incapacity of Europe even to react to that, how you can be then on human rights the center of the world if you are not capable to put these values and these rights in practice in your... So what I try to do is really to mix it every time also with personal experiences. So it's not a manifesto this time. It's more a description of this disease.
But wasn't the first book with Daniel Cohn-Bendit convincing enough? Did you need something more in order to convince with your ideas, integration, so on? Now a film, a book which will be translated also in English, but for the United States. Was it not convincing enough? Why?
Well, it was only a manifesto, it was only a book. And this, what we try to do is to go far broader in the different countries, at the other side of the Atlantic also. Hopefully an audiovisual project on this, really, and also involving the social media far more drastically than we did in the past. Because you can do what you want. If we don't spread this message, there's going to never be a public opinion for this message. It are political leaders who have to take the lead. It's so easy to say to the people, yeah, there is no public opinion of it. If there is no political leadership who is spreading this vision, how you can then expect that there is a public opinion or citizens following it? And so that's the next. I don't think that with one manifesto you can do it. You need to spread it more decisive inside all the public opinions in Europe, and also not only with books.
And the idea of the movie, of the film, is it inspired by Al Gore? The idea.
Well, yeah, well, the inconvenient truth, and you are talking about now. I went to Los Angeles to see Mr. Bender. Mr. Bender is the producer, and in Los Angeles, it was in the, how you call it, the Pony Club in Beverly Hills. A very, very fantastic place, a fantastic, beautiful place in the Pony Club, and he looked to me and he said, "Yeah, you're going to make a film. And what is the title of the title of the book? Europe's Disease." How the fuck? Who is interested here in Europe's disease? So I can tell you, at the side of the Pacific, don't go with Europe's disease. So after 2 hours, I was completely disorientated, first of all. This doesn't happen many times, but it was completely disorientated, depressive even. But then in the second part of the trip, we found our Wiley, our literary agent, Wiley in New York. That's the shark of the editors in America, and Perseus. So the Inconvenient Truth is certainly an inspiration, because Al Gore went with Inconvenient Truth from little town to little town, and he got 200 people in a room, and then 300 people in a room, and 500 people. And one day, Bender went in with a producer of films, and he said, there are only slides, what they are showing here. We can make a film of it. And still, the film is a lot of slides, The Inconvenient Truth. But it worked. Mm-hmm. Why could we not explain the same thing? So, or another thing, Inside Job. The film that has the best explained the financial crisis, I think, is Inside Job, better than whatever other thing. So I think that Europe and the disease of Europe needs also such an instrument.
Mm-hmm. I think we don't need the British anymore to criticize Europe. Verhofstadt does it very well. So do you find him harder on the diagnosis than you are, or than people are in the public opinion sometimes in Europe or in Britain? Or do you find it precise and correct, or would you go beyond that?
I think it's very important for someone to write a book that is a critique of the European Union, rather than Europe. We'll come back to maybe what Europe is, from the standpoint of European federalism, I suppose, and some of the documents of the 1950s that probably are the high point of European unification, or the germ of that idea. I think where I disagree with him is a really sort of profound cultural difference. The real difference I see between the problem of the European Union and its real disease is that the European Union embodies the gap and the estrangement between rulers and ruled. The European Union, its institutions like the Eurozone, which is incredibly significant and does actually completely overturn the sovereignty of countries and parliaments who want to choose how to spend the national wealth that they have earned and created on their territory. The European Union is very much a European Union of the elites, the European Union particularly of state elites and the political class. And I think over the last 20 years, more than at any time, they have become estranged from Europe's voters and from reality. So I think that in that sense, Guy's book is really, really helpful, because he makes a profound and strong argument to, if you like, escape from the reality of the European Union and to make a political case for something else. I would seek to do the same, but I think it would probably be a different political case. But I think it's an important book.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Heath, what do you think is maybe the most pertinent critique that Mr. Verhofstadt makes towards Europe? He speaks about the plumbing politics, the fact that every politic comes too late, too little. Is it true? Is it exaggerated?
I think it is true. I think it's inevitable to some extent. You're never going to have a fast-moving machine that brings together so many people and so many layers of government. But I think your tactics for trying to bring a message to a wider audience are the essential ones, whatever the final structural output is. Because it really struck me in an editorial in The Guardian this morning, talking about the challenge of Britain's in campaign to keep Britain in Europe, was that it would have to develop a message and convince people that Europe could exist for the many rather than the few. And it's very easy for all of us sitting here in this room, or people who work in political or finance or other jobs like that do require us to do things across borders. It's self-evident, the value of Europe. But for a lot of other people who can't influence these institutions, who don't get to come to wonderful institutions like the BOZAR, it's really not self-evident anymore. So if you're not willing to try and break out of the bubble and do the Al Gore sort of thing, then there's not even a hope for getting that new structure. And so more power to you for trying to take the case out there, because it is a set of institutions that I think will implode somehow if it doesn't manage to break out of the current elite restraints that it finds itself in.
Yves, Europe for the elite?
I tend to agree with that. What I like about Guy Verhofstadt, apart from the fact that he produces a decent wine, is that he still believes in the political debate. And what the real disease of Europe is for me is the lack of political debate. I see technocrats, and they are liberal, they are socialists, they are Christian Democrats, but they all adhere to the same view, which it's no longer the view, it's become a religion. It's the Tina religion. There is no alternative. What we do is self-evident. What we do isn't policy, isn't the choice on the right or on the left. It's the only, I don't know where it comes from, godly truth, that you have to do what you have to do. Austerity, austerity, and still more austerity. And the effect is that you create in Europe strong anti-sentiments against the European Union and against the European institutions. Because the biggest deficit at this moment in Europe for me is a deficit of mercy and of compassion with the most weak in our society. A European Union that can mobilize billions and trillions to save financial institutions overnight, but can't find the money to save a lost generation in South Europe from unemployment, isn't a project that's going to go a long way further in the future. And that's the big problem. That's the disease of Europe.
Maybe you want to react? Compassion, it's not a word I have read, I think, in the book.
Sorry?
Compassion. I didn't read the term in your book.
That's an English word.
Yes.
So it's in Dutch, huh?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you have to take the chapter on the Mediterranean to feel it. How we, by lacking an asylum policy, by lacking a migration policy, by lacking common instruments, we create suffering. And the most important suffering we create in our neighborhoods. In our neighborhood, I think. The way we looked away from the Syrian conflict is a scandal, and we created two things at the same in one movement. We created IS, and at the same time a refugee crisis. We cannot. I have tried to explain what it means for these people to come to Europe, how it is for them an ideal, a goal, an objective, and that they cannot reach because the way we are handling it. So I thought that was compassion, but and compassion we need certainly a social dimension in Europe. So in the book, this government in the future going to be responsible. That was already the case in the first European Constitution. In the first European Constitution, they were responsible for economic, monetary, social, and fiscal policies. Can you imagine? So in the 50s, they said social, economic, monetary, and fiscal policies are main competences for the Union and for this government. And now, today, it's not even possible to talk about this. And the reason why we went into the internal market was, because this constitution was not adopted, then we fell back in this only economic thinking, without political, social, and thinking around. And that is the main problem. And I think to emerge from this crisis, I make always the comparison. How it is possible that the Americans...
How do you explain that everybody thinks the same way? Because when I make this kind of critique, you're often put away as a left-wing thinker, and everybody knows the left is... but you cite yourself in your book the example of President Obama. They had the financial crisis also.
Exactly.
What did he do? He did, first of all, he sanitized his financial institutions, and then he went along with a lot of public deficit spending just to get new jobs, subsidized jobs, but new jobs, And that was a kickstart for the economy. Yeah. We didn't do neither.
No. We are always saying that in America they are the capitalists and we are the more social democratic continent. Wow. There were more Keynesian policies in the US, far more, and not in Europe. They did three things. They did TARP. That was immediately recapitalizing their banks within 6 months. And they solved that banking problem by TARP. 400 billion euro pushed into the American banking system. We are still discussing that problem. Because they say, oh, we're going to do a 4th round of stress tests to know what the problem is. We know what the problem is. We know that there are 10 times more bad assets in the European banking system than in the American banking system. 10 times more. So secondly, what they did was an investment plan. $800 billion investment plan. Keynesian, huh? Keynes in practice. And we are still discussing the Juncker Fund. And we hope that the Juncker Fund is going to work by putting using 8 billion and to create a fund of 300 billion. Jesus Christ did not so good as we, the vissen and the broden, you know that story. Well, we're going to repeat it. We're going to repeat it for you. America not. It was 800 billion every year. It is on 10 years, so it was 80 billion every year from the budget. And then third, they did quantitative easing immediately. So the Federal Reserve Board did quantitative easing, increasing the amount of money in the economy. In 2009, we do also quantitative easing, 5-6 years later, to avoid the deflation of our economy, not to support the European economy and the growth in the European economy, but to avoid the deflation. So they did in 2009, 2008, these three things, and they are out of the crisis. It started there, but they are out. They have more than 3% of growth. They are now discussing, how to stop the overheating of the American economy, and eventually to raise interest rates. Hopefully they don't do it. And we, in the meanwhile, are still discussing, should we have a government in Europe? Yeah, maybe. Should we have a state authority behind the currency? Yeah, it's difficult. But should we give more autonomy to the European Central Bank, as the Federal Reserve Board has?
I think this question is one that poses a real difficulty for you, because you want to build a new Europe. You want a radical departure from the status quo, but you're still tied to the old institutions. So the real problem with the Eurozone response to the crisis, which became its own crisis and is still now its own crisis, was because the political class defended the institution of the euro, an irrational construct where Greece could borrow for the same price as Germany. And when the financial crisis hit, to defend the sovereign signature of the euro system of central banks, measures were taken to defend those institutions, internal devaluation in the south, turning Greece into what is effectively a debt colony of Frankfurt. And by doing that, you set in train real and justified political resentments, where you are effectively, and you're seen to do it, and you rub people's noses into it, you are effectively saying that completely arbitrary targets, such as the 3% of GDP debt ratio every year, which has got nothing to do, no economist dreamt up that target of Jacques Delors and the French finance minister to suit the political contingencies and opportunism of François Mitterrand. It's not an economic target, it's an entirely political, arbitrary, it's bonkers as some of the targets in the Soviet Union. And to uphold those institutions and those norms, you devastate the economies of countries, but more importantly, you poison the well of politics in that country. So today, when the European Commission, as Spanish elections are happening, sends the budget back to Spain and says, this is not good enough, what is that saying to the Spanish people? It's not only just saying, we wrecked your economy, it's saying that the highest budgetary authority isn't you when you meet in an election, it's these people in Brussels. So I think you need to make the break. You need to take a step, and you need to say, yes, I, Guy Verhofstadt, am prepared to build the new Europe by getting rid of the old European Union.
Yeah, but it's not giving up the euro for me, because it's nothing irrational with a currency zone. And with the euro, there is, because it abolished what? It abolished monetary borders, it abolished physical borders, it creates a huge new economic growth and has created a huge economic growth after the start of the
asset
euro.
bubble. Bruegel Institute showed that inter-EU trade...
No, but that doesn't mean that there are no problems. The problems for me is not the euro. The problems is that we start with a single currency without any of the necessary institutions that you need for a currency. So the Americans, how they did it? They started with creating from a confederation, they make the federation. Philadelphia, 1787. Then came Hamilton. Hamilton, big fight with Jefferson. At the end, he wants, and he creates a treasury. And after the treasury, he creates treasury bonds to finance the federation. And only then, they do, at the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century, the Coinage Act. It's the start of the dollar, and like I indicated already, in competition with even the Spanish currency for a long time. We are far more intelligent than the Americans. We start with a currency, and then after a few years we say, oh shit, we have no government that is responsible behind it. We have no treasury. We have no common managing of debt, excessive debt. We don't have a common economic strategy. And so we are obliged then to do what you're saying. But there is nothing wrong with the currency. There are big difference, far more big difference in the US between the different states of the dollar zone than in Europe. Far more important. The problem is that they don't make a problem when there is a problem with Florida. Like there was a problem with Florida, they helped Florida and they put 5% of the GDP of America to rescue a state. And we have a problem with Greece. You know what Greece is? It's 300 billion of historic debt. 300 billion. It's a huge amount, but it's in fact a small amount if you compare it to a yearly GDP in Europe of 15 trillion. That's 15,000 billion. So there is no Chinese, no American who even understand the euro crisis. He's saying, what you're talking about? It's about how many? 300 billion. And what's your GDP? 15 trillion. That's 1.7, 1.8% of your total GDP. An historical debt. It's because the lack of solidarity, the lack of also reform in Greece, that was the debate with Tsipras. There is the problem. You cannot have a currency, the advantage of the currency, and then saying, but after that it's over. There is no common managing of the debt, there is no common economic strategy, there is no treasury, there are no Eurobonds. That doesn't work.
But Mr. Verhofstadt, we didn't forget to do that. We just decided it, so no.
No, because it was a political project there. I think that what Brune is saying is completely true.
It was a political project in bad faith. It was countries like France, and actually Britain, Thatcher as well, who were so suspicious of a united Germany, the really good thing to happen in Europe in the last 20 years. They were so suspicious of united Europe, and Mitterrand particularly wanted to create a euro to shackle Germany, to keep Germany down.
But
and that's bad faith.
It was a political project. That's 100% true what you're saying. But that doesn't mean that you can make it a good economic project too, because it's... Most economists think it's the Eurozone, you can make it an optimal currency zone from it. It's no problem. An optimal currency area. And those who are saying, yeah, the differences are too big inside Europe, that's not true. There are far more bigger differences in other places in the world, certainly in the dollar zone than within Europe.
But
Only we don't have the institutions.
You need structural reforms to make a viable currency Eurozone. Those reforms aren't there. What is there now on the field is a failure. And everybody is keeping up appearances and saying there's no problem. That's what's happening in reality.
Take Greece, for example. In Greece, what they did for years was to ask moderation of wages, increases of taxation on small and medium companies, and the Greek political class found it very good because the real change that is necessary in Greece is a change of the clientelistic system, the change of their banking system, what is completely 100% public, opening the professions. There are tens and tens of professions who are not open, and that they didn't do it for years. And even Tsipras at a certain moment wanted to use the clientelistic system in his favor, to have clients and to have votes. That was necessary. Nobody did it. Not the IMF, not the European Union, asked really to Venizelos and Samaras and later on to Tsipras to do the real reforms. So what is then if Greece go out, who is paying the bill then, you think? If Greece come back to the drachma, who is paying the bill of that? Ordinary citizens in Greece, because then this drachma shall be devaluated again, not only with the 20-30% people have already paid out, again 30-40% of loss of purchasing power if you start again with their national currency. And with a secondary effect that the political class, they don't need to do their reforms. They can continue with their clientelistic system. They can continue with their corruption. They can continue with their political parties, paid and financed by the public banks. So saying the Grexit is the proof of the fact that the euro is not working. No, it is because the Greeks are not foolish. The Greek citizens, in a big majority, with 80%, are in favor of the euro. Because they know very well if the euro disappears and there is a Grexit, they're going to pay the bill, and not the political class in Greece. And it's in the political class, there lies the problem.
Just one final point on this, and again it strikes really to the heart of what the problem is, and it's an objective problem, which is that Germans don't want to share their hard-earned euros with other European countries, particularly when they're Greeks at the moment, that seems. The French aren't enthusiastic about it. The French are definitely not keen on bossy people in Brussels and the European Commission telling them how to structure their budget and how to cut some of the public investment that they see as being behind their great country and its achievements. So there you have a really big problem, is you've built an institution which in practice is based on fiscal transfers, or will have to be if it's going to survive. And it's also based on horrible Finnish people and Danes in Brussels coming and wagging a finger at you and telling you off and saying, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't have social democracy because it breaches the EU's 3% of GDP every year. And that's what's actually going on. So you have a situation where the euro, a European institution, is actually creating recriminations and resentments, which is actually setting back the cause of European cooperation, something that I would passionately believe in. So you've got that problem, which is why I would say if you really believe in European cooperation, the first thing to do is get rid of the euro.
Ryan?
No, because
Ryan,
it's because it's based on unanimity. The Finns can do that because it's based on unanimity. The Finns are saying, yeah, okay, we're going to give some money to Greece if we have a Greek island as collateral. That was mainly the point, the position next time we can maybe ask for Greek wine. That could be even better collateral, maybe. But that is what they are doing, because it's based on unanimity. It's completely crazy. So the euro is now depending from the true Finns, who are supporting, and in the government in Finland, you have 500,000 voters of the true Finns. They are against the euro, in fact, and they are deciding on that's the way it works. So the governance of the system is not good, is not working. If you are depending from a true Finn party who have 60% of the vote in Finland, and that is deciding on the euro. That is what is the reality today. And if it is not them, then maybe another party who is in government in one of the Eurozone countries. It cannot work. That has to be decided by majority voting, by a government who is responsible for it, by a European Minister of Finance who is responsible for it, and who takes this responsibility. That's the way it works in the other side of the Atlantic.
Ryan.
We don't ask to help Florida, that the 49 other governors are saying yes.
We'll ask Ryan, do you think that the main reason of the failure of Europe is the refusal of the nation state to accept a common authority or to resign to their sovereignty?
I would get an argument for and against, and I think it gets back to a point that Bruno was beginning to make earlier on about what is Europe and what is the European Union, and the Venn diagram where the two overlap. So an example for and against. I think it probably is true to say that the European Union works best when it's vested with some form of executive authority or where it's most integrated. So the example I'd give there is one of how the crises, economic and financial, that we've been experiencing, they'd be much worse were it not actually for some of the decisions that Neelie Kroes was taking in 2008 and 2009. And I don't say that to valorize her above other people, but she happened to be the person with the most executive power in Brussels at that time to make decisions about bank rescues, to really put her hand up and tell Sarkozy off and say, no, you're not just going to throw cash at Citroën and other car companies and generate this race to the bottom, what they call beggar thy neighbor policies. I think we'd be in a much worse financial situation right now, and we probably wouldn't have a single market as we think of it if we hadn't been able to put the brakes on in that situation using some executive authority. So that's a tick to say, yes, the EU can really do things and probably needs some more power in other areas to get on with that. But I think there is a lazy assumption in some of our discussions that the European Union is the solution to all of these problems when there might be a non-governmental mechanism or a non-European Union mechanism to make us work more as Europe together. And the example I would give there is this desperate desire of all of these refugees, these economic migrants, whatever different categories they fit into, they do want to come to Europe. That's a completely different situation to the decades in and around World War II, where people fled Europe, where they tried to make a start in America and Australia and other places because there was more opportunity there. But those people aren't fleeing to Europe because they want the amazing security blanket of the European Union as a set of institutions. That's not why they're coming here. It's a set of other things that all of us, and I presume to say it, I've been here enough now, like we've all been creating another society and another set of values and reflected and reinforced through the European Union a lot of the time, but not because of the European Union. So I guess it's a question back to you, Mr. Verhofstadt, is how much of it do we have to achieve through federalism or razing to the ground some of the institutions that aren't working as part of the EU? And what can we do outside of that EU house where there's more Europe, but not necessarily more European Union? What's the balance or the mix of those two?
My main point is the main change is to get rid in every of our policies of the unanimity rule. I think that's the first thing what we need, because that makes it impossible to take decisions. That makes it impossible to transfer an additional competence to, and then to get rid of the way we organize our institutions. Our institutions are always 28 or 28 multiply with something. And there are 28 commissioners where everybody knows that 15 is enough. There are 28 auditors in the Court of Auditors where everybody knows that 3 or 4 are enough. There are 28 judges in the court, and now we're going to increase them. But how many are we going to increase them, you think? With 28, naturally. We're going to go from 28 to 56. Even when the court asks only 12 additional judges, we give them 28. Because there are 28 member states. So it's this logic and this obese institutions that we have are the consequence of the fact that everything is still governed by nation states and by consensus and by unanimity. And if we don't get rid of this, this is going to continue what we have. And then on the refugee crisis, I think the point you made, there is no economic migration policy in the Union. There is no common asylum policy inside the Union. There is no common border control inside the European Union. Economic migration, I'm going to only take that example. What is the reality? In the US, you have a green card. In Canada, you have a green card. You want to enter, well, different systems. The Canadian system is based on bureaucracy, and the American system is based on a contract that you have. Well, in Europe, there are still 28. But we have a blue card. The blue card is a European system, but it doesn't replace the 28, you know? It's in top, a 29th system that we have. And the only country who's using is Germany a little bit, and it's over. So we have 29 systems. Instead of, and the consequence of it is that we don't have labor mobility in Europe. The labor mobility in Europe Even when in the British press, everybody's talking about labor mobility, all these Romanians and Bulgarians who shall come to our labor market, the reality is there is no labor mobility. Labor mobility is 10 times lower in Europe than in the US. And the figures are there to prove that. And that makes that millions of vacancies are there inside the European Union, more than 2 million. Can you imagine that you have an employment rate, where Yves was talking about in the south of Europe, where 50% of young people have no job for the moment, but in the meanwhile there are 2 million open vacancies inside the European Union because of a lack of labor mobility. You want to solve that problem, you say, no, not all these Bulgarians and Romanians coming in. That is what one of the debates in Britain, for example, where they say, yeah, millions are coming. 30 million shall come. It were 30,000 at the end that came to Britain. The official figures of the British administration at the end. 30,000, not 30 million. And so on all these issues, we have to get rid of one thing: unanimity and the governance by member states. A club of 28 heads of states and government cannot run Europe. It's impossible to run Europe. Cannot run it. They are all thinking to their own interest, why they should run Europe.
Yes, but my question is, who is thinking the same as you do? Because are you alone in the room?
Yeah.
Yeah, they are convinced. But that's the problem.
I think what Beatrice, because let's go from the disease to the cure. Suppose that I agree with you that there is more federalism is needed. We need a United States of Europe. That's the way to go. And I see Guy Verhofstadt, who is advocating it with his usual energy and voluntarism. And I see around in the political spectrum, and I see nobody else. I see Eurosceptics. I see nationalists. I see pragmatists who take opinion polls, say a majority thinks that's what I will defend. I see every kind of politician, but I only see one Guy Verhofstadt. I hate to want to be the one to put this to you, but you're a prophet in the desert.
No, absolutely not. So a few years ago, I know that argument. They were saying, yeah, look, all what you're saying is that then can that become a reality? And I said, yeah, look to the banking union. The banking union, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, was impossible. Impossible. 2008, 2009, huge crisis, meeting at the Elysee. Merkel said, no way. This is national competences. Never they're going to be a transfer of these competences to the European level. Meanwhile, for the 130 biggest banks, I should do it for every bank, we have a banking union. And this banking union is responsible for the financial sector, at least the transnational, the pan-European banks that were. That was impossible a few years ago. So those people were saying, you see, it's impossible, you say that, but 5 years later, no, it is possible to realize that. When, at one condition, when our heads of states and government are with their back against the wall,
I would say so.
Then only they react. And that is what shall happen exactly. The same shall happen with the refugee crisis. Until now, to say a European border and coast guard. That is what they are saying, the ministers of Interior of the 28. I can tell you, the Commission is going forward with a proposal in January, within 2 years, European border and coast guard. Why? Not because they want. They are obliged to do so, because they are with their back against the wall. And so I think it's not true, okay, that's a prophet in the desert and so on. But what is true, we have to create a public opinion for that. It's only nationalist and populist world today criticizing the European Union and then attacking her.
The public opinion was moving the last months of years. First of all, because they were cheated by their banks, so they had problems with the financial systems. They were dead banks. That's why they created a banking union. And now you have dead body in the Mediterranean Sea, and that's why people do agree at one point, after months of discussion, to have quotas. So it's a pessimistic view, but do we need dead people or dead things to make progress?
That's my point. So that's the reason.
That's
the reason why we
add
start
something,
to do
because you speak about the von Brentano constitution in 1953, but it was after the war. Even then, they didn't succeed to make the constitution because one of the countries, France in this case, refused to accept the idea of a federal constitution. So what is needed to go that far as you want to go?
No, I think that the crisis that what is needed for the public opinion? You see that this continent is the only continent which, for the moment, not really growing. It's in stagnation. Because everybody talk about the slowdown in China. You have to go see it a little bit, the slowdown in China. I was in Hangzhou, and there the economic growth was 9.3%, but was not 10 as they expected in the past. I say 9.3, okay, thank you. And we are the only, Africa, 4-5% of economic growth. The US, more than 3% economic growth. The only continent who is not emerging from the crisis, thank you, seems to me, is for the moment Europe. So we have to use that, because I think that if you make a serious analysis of the disease in Europe, you can also convince people to do the jump forward. The problem, in my opinion, or not the public opinion, the problem, in my opinion, are political leaders who think that their national sovereignty is key, and in fact, they don't have sovereignty anymore in the globalized world of today.
That's all going to
they
come
don't
to a head.
have anymore.
Ryan?
Yeah. That's going to come to a head, and to use your own logic from how we got the banking union and how we saw action on refugees, it might well be that we need to see disintegration in order to drive more integration, and the British referendum and debate is the live example of that. It's going to have to take, according to your logic, a very close-run referendum, or for Britain to actually try to leave in order to get the things that you want, because that's the only foreseeable situation where those leaders will be backs to the wall again.
But Brexit is an opportunity for Europe, an enormous opportunity for a far more integrated union. The Brexit is a positive thing in the sense that they're going to ask for a number of changes and declarations, and we have to say, okay, we're going to talk about it, but for once you're going to not oppose yourself then to the more deepening of the European Union that is necessary. So you have to take that in a win-win discussion and debate, because that is what is happening today. I was negotiated for the Parliament a fiscal compact. You know that it was impossible to do the fiscal compact. The fiscal compact is the rule of a budgetary, a balanced budget, and it was impossible to do it inside the treaty. Why? Because Britain was opposed. So I entered the meeting room where we negotiated that, Parliament, Commission, and the 28 member states. Who was sitting there? A British delegation. So what you're doing here? You are not, they are invited. And who was taking the floor? Always the first in the debate, the British delegation. And who was, in fact, we didn't vote at the end, because it was by consensus. So, in fact, because of them, we have to do it outside the treaty, but nevertheless, they were there around the table. So I think we have to solve that problem. And let's use the Brexit, let's use the request of Cameron to say, okay, we're going to do it. You want a two-tier Europe, we make a two-tier Europe. You want 2 circles, we make 2 circles. You don't want this, and you want an opt-out there, and we give you your opt-out. But at the same time, we gotta go forward. It's over now to be depending from unanimity inside the European Union. So, I think more and more people comes to also heads of states and government. You know what, Hollande, you have seen Hollande at the end in his reply in the European Parliament. Mm-hmm. It was exactly that what he was saying. Exactly, for the first time a French president is saying, yeah, we French were for 3 times stopped and blocked a more integrated Europe. Once in 1954, once with the Luxembourg Compromise and Charles de Gaulle, once in 2005 with the referendum. I have seen a president who say, yeah, no, we need a leap forward, and we shall not let us stop anymore by the unanimity rule and by Britain. If Britain wants to solve the problem, we can solve the problem.
And what makes you think that it's just a one-day declaration or a statement by Mr. Hollande?
No, I think it's more than that. The idea is really, with the Parliament, to work towards a huge revision of the treaties in 2016, 2017. That's the idea.
Bruno Waterfield wanted to comment on Brexit.
Well, I think I think the biggest risk to the European Union isn't a British exit. I would look far more to the explosion of Euroscepticism in countries like Italy, which is now more Eurosceptic than Britain, in Greece. Spain's almost as Eurosceptic on the Eurobarometer mistrust indications as Britain. If you're worried about the future of European integration, I would look far more there than Britain, because as you observe quite rightly, Britain has always been semi-detached, and if it becomes a bit more semi-detached again, what's the problem? I have a real problem though with what you're saying, where you make the realm of European integration into one of necessity as compulsion. It's not a realm of freedom, it's something you have to do. It's Tina, in fact, isn't it? There is no alternative. And that element of compulsion that's built into the euro, that element of compulsion that came through with migrant quotas, creates a poisonous atmosphere, because it's about making people do things. You're going to make the refugees go to Latvia, even though they don't want to go to Latvia. The countries like Slovakia that don't want to be part of it, you're going to outvote them. You're going to make them because it's necessary, because we are compelled to do it by some kind of globalization predestined area. And I think that's unfortunate, because I think the appeal of Europe is the idealism, the voluntarism of Europe. The idea of Europe and our history, in fact, and our struggles for self-determination in the Europe of empires and fascism, was not to be done to, wasn't to be determined, but was to determine our own futures. And that's one of the problems I have with some of your arguments.
But on the quota system, I agree with you. I think it was a mistake by the Commission to start with the quota system as the first element of how to deal with the refugee crisis. They had to come forward with an asylum package, an economic migration package, a border control, and then make the quota a part of the whole solution. And I'm pretty sure that we should not have got such a resistance in countries like Czechoslovakia if such a global approach. That's in any way my experience with the governments of these countries, that they could accept such quotas as a part, as an element of a global overall new approach, and not what happened now to push through a quota system without any global view on how to deal with these problems.
If we speak about the failure of Europe as far as governance is concerned, but as structures are concerned, as politics is concerned, but isn't the biggest failure now the Orban case? Because it's a failure on the value of Europe, that how can Europe...
Well, it's a symptom, of course, that Europe has become mostly an economic project through the years, and that the European morality isn't a priority anymore. What are you, as a European Union, if you cannot uphold your own moral values and your own democratic standards against a guy like Viktor Orban? Then what say do you have in the world?
I agree fully. That's the reason why, even against a little bit the editor, who thought, yeah, is it necessary to have a chapter about Orban? I said, yeah, you need a chapter about Orban, because Orban is one of the key elements of the European crisis, but of the moral crisis that we have. It's not only an economic one, also a moral one, and a geopolitical one. So it has to be there. And for the moment, yeah, besides a letter that has been sent by the Commission authorities to Orban, I don't know how many it are already. That's the only thing what we are doing. While the treaty is that said, the economic, everybody says it's an economic project, but what is the economic project of Europe? Everybody's talking about the internal market. This is a project, internal market. 30% of the internal market is free. 70% is not European. Services, not European. Energy, not European. Capital, not European. Telecom, not European. Digital, not European. You need to have 20, there are still 28 regulators. So if you have is there a small company, you have a new app, start your new app. You need 28 authorizations in Europe and then a deal with, so even the European, the economic project is lacking. Why? Because national authorities don't want to give up. They don't want to give up. You know it better than I do, Mr. Heath, because you were there in the
digital
front,
agenda.
The digital agenda is a typical example of it. The telecom is another example of it, and both are linked naturally. So also there, it's not only about, okay, we're going to protect Orban. Oh yeah, we have no geopolitical role because we don't like a defense community. It's even in basic things, like for example, why all the big internet companies are American and Asian? Why? Because we don't have a market. We don't have one regulator. You can solve it like that. One regulator, as in the US, on digital services and on telecom. And then you should have bigger companies than now, because all telecom companies are small companies compared on world level. So also on this issue. So the disease is that. The disease is not only, oh, it's about values, oh, it's about economics, oh, it's about institutional matters, or geopolitical. No, it's the same. The disease is going to all the policies of the Union, all of them. And there is also, I think, only one remedy against this, that is to get rid of the unanimity rule. And I have maybe to come back to what the founding fathers thought that was necessary.
Aren't you engaged now in a course contre la montre against two phenomena who are very popular, or who try maybe better than you can do with the European ID to bind people or bind the public opinion? It's on the one hand the left and the Syriza, the Podemos of Europe, who are really trying to gather the people who are criticizing Europe and asking for another Europe than the one it's presently at stake. And the other way is the nationalists. The nationalist party do give to people a very, not convenient, but I can imagine that people could cherish that solution because they give some kind of identity. They give the sense to the people that they belong somewhere. How are you going to fight against those nationalism, for example?
But maybe let's come back here within a few months after the Spanish election to see what happened in the Spanish election, where for the first time, so what I think is that most people are fed up with conservatives at one hand and socialists at the other hand, say, yep, if you have the one or the other, what makes a difference? There is crisis in both of them. And I think that people are looking for an answer to this. And they are falling from time to time in nationalist traps, or Podemos or others. But in the meanwhile, in Spain, you see, for example, that the emerging party, the party who is now as big as the PSOE and the Parti Popular, the Ciudadanos movement, is a pro-European one. It's 200% pro-European. And is explaining to the Spanish citizens that they need other reforms, less corruption, and so on, but with a European agenda. Albert Rivera, who won the Catalan elections also, and at the same time, who is now, in the polls, the last polls of yesterday in El País, showing at an equal footing now with the PSOE and the PP, and not Podemos. Not Podemos. Podemos was high in the day and is now falling back because people are. They look also to Greece and saying, yeah, if that is what is the same thing to happen with us, what is happening in Greece, I don't want to eat from that menu. I want something different. So I see in the south of Europe, in a number of countries, coming up such reformist, third way, pro-European forces for the first time in a country that has always been split in Partido Popular and PSOE, and nobody else existed. There may be some anarchists and communists, but that was the only thing that existed in Spain.
Do you think he's too optimistic? Does he see something we don't see?
No, I think they're good points. But I think what he's not alive to is some of the tensions. And the definition of populism is a party that seeks to put the people back in charge, but a party that defines the people against the institutions of a status quo. That might be through hostility to the euro or Eurozone austerity or local corruption and the need for local reform. And I think after the humiliation of Syriza, we've seen a swing back to the sort of reformism and civic values and all the rest of it. But the tension and the dynamic is still there, I think. And I think some of it will depend on how the European Union reacts. But the European Union does actually have a problem with the civic idea, the idea of active citizenship on your territory, being in control of issues like spending the wealth that you make on that territory. Those tensions still exist, and I don't think they're going to go away. And I think the decline in Podemos is also based on something quite negative, which is people are afraid of having something done to them and their country, as was done to Greece. I don't think that's a very positive development, really.
If I could have an input as a semi-outsider here, so I'm really putting my Australian hat on and talking from a distance now, where I find debates in Europe, virtually all political debates, really quite insular. They're not really thinking about Europe and its challenges from a global perspective in a way that a smaller country like Australia was forced to do, I think, even 30 years ago. And so I think that populism sometimes has a point if there is like genuine entrenched corruption in different systems. But what I think I see more often in Europe is not sort of a deep entrenched corruption. Yes, from time to time in some parts of Greece, some parts of Italy, some other places. But it's more like a weak and stale leadership, where the leadership isn't willing to say to the people and to make the argument to say, hang on, there's actually 1 billion Chinese, there's 1 billion Indians who are willing to work harder than you. You've got a choice. Do you want to work harder and we shift the structure of the economy so that you can compete and you can get richer and you can stay at the top of the game? Or actually, are you just happy with the wealth that you have now? Are you happy with the social structure that you have now and sort of a gentle decline? Like you don't see leaders putting that choice there. And this overwhelming fear of migration. I look at a country like Australia where 28% of people were born overseas, more than 50% of the population, one of the parents in that family was literally born in another country. And that works because it's one country without the extreme of Latvia versus Germany or the UK in terms of wealth. So it's a little bit easier to manage than Europe. But what Australians did was had a long fought argument over the course of about 5 decades about how to manage that and to do it. And I don't see that long-term thinking and that hard argument happening here. 20 years ago in Australia, when a prime minister would stand up and say, our place is in Asia, that's where our future is, we don't necessarily look like other people in Asia, we don't necessarily have the same culture as Asia, but there is an inevitability about our demography and about our geography that's going to send us there. That was radical and out of place, and only time solved that problem, where most Australians would now agree with that opinion. And I see very few leaders in Europe having that sort of different but equivalent conversation with European citizens today. I mean, I think you're probably in that category, Guy, where you're willing to drag people out of their comfort zone and think about a future that doesn't exist and might never exist, but which you can't ignore the possibilities of. But I think there are very few examples in Europe today, and populism isn't the solution to that. You need something more than populism, but nor is just reverting into an EU inward-looking debate or just saying that the EU's structures could solve it. It's another ingredient of leadership that's missing that is necessary.
You want to add? Yeah. We are going towards the end of the evening. I will just leave you a few minutes, because I have my own personal questions to Mr. Verhofstadt, but to think about a final comment or something you want to tell him before he takes the bus for touring Europe. You are not only a prophet, and I'm sorry I will ask you a very Belgian question and maybe a very Delvaux question, but you are a politician also, and it's not because you have a red cover and a green shirt, but you are blue. And you are the leader of the blue at the Parliament, European Parliament. So I have a Belgian question, a question that made us very angry, and we fought about this, but would it have been possible for you to write this book and to write what you write about nationalism had the NVA been part of your group in Europe?
That's interesting, because an interesting question that I like the question. Because why? Because in the Parliament they are merely voting in another way than in the Belgian parliament always. So I asked myself, who are you talking about? These in Europe or those in Belgium? Because they are mostly different from point of view. For example, they are voting against proposals of the Commission, while in Belgian government they are voting in favor of the proposal. So you have to clarify yourself of what NVA you are talking about. But because I see two of them. Those in Antwerp and those in the government. Seems to me not the same for the moment.
But you don't have finally to manage it.
I didn't pronounce his name, so you can underline it.
So, Bruno, a last comment or an advice?
Just a last comment, and I suppose it goes to the comparison with the United States of America. The states in America were administrative areas, more or less. They weren't peoples, they weren't nations, they didn't have that history of self-determination, that history where territory becomes certainly contiguous or alongside the idea of citizenship. They didn't have struggles against empires. They didn't have struggles, well, apart from liberating themselves from Britain, but they didn't have struggles for democracy. So whilst when you look at Europe, the peoples and the nations aren't necessarily the same thing as the states. They're very different, though, from the United States, which is one nation and one people. I just don't see that in Europe. And for me, one of the strengths of Europe is in our history and is in the wealth of those struggles, including the Enlightenment, including the struggle for democracy and the ideas of liberty, fraternity, and equality.
No, I agree that you cannot compare completely, but a book that I like very much, I make reference also, is Why Nations Fail, of Akamoglu and Robinson, who is explaining that, in fact, political institutions is the basis of your economic quality, yes or no. So everybody says the economy is stupid. I'm saying it's politics stupid. So it's good for politicians that we can say it's politics stupid, because they showed, and in a very convincing way, that if you don't have the right political institution, you can you go from crisis to crisis, and that is what we live through for the moment. And we can learn things from the US, but it's different. It's true. And the best way to manage our diversity and to guarantee diversity in Europe is the European Union. That's the best way to guarantee our diversity. Because what we have seen in the 20th century is nation-states who became unilingual, unicultural, monolingual, monocultural, monoethnic. The European Union was Europe was far more diverse in the past. It's all our tragedies, our 20 million people who were slaughtered in the 20th century that have disappeared, in fact, this European diversity. But finally, it's the European Union who is a guarantee for this European diversity. And don't say, yeah, there is no difference in the US. No, there you have states who have the death penalty and others who don't have the death penalty. At least on that we have unanimity. No, Mr. Orban, I think, he wants also to come back to this thing. And he is even saying that it is maybe a question of subsidiarity. The death penalty.
Yves, a last comment?
Well, we've talked a lot about Europe, but we didn't say a word about the author. And when you introduced me, you said you followed him all his career.
So, doctor.
What kind of a guy he is. But I'm not a qualified psychotherapist. You need a battery, I think, to examine him. But
is this
I once tried to make a profile of him, and apart from the fact that he uses more energy than an average nuclear plant.
But yeah, the nuclear plants for the moment, you have a low production.
I had a conversation with with his team leader, his chef de cabinet, Luc Koenen, and his communications manager, Nolda Slange. And they confided, they said, we have a nickname for him. We call him Peter Pan. And I said, why that? He said, because he can act as a stubborn child. Because one day he says white, the other day he says not white. One day he has a brilliant plan, and a week later he says, this is so foolish, who thought of this? You did. No. He makes us work 24/7. And I said, okay, he's a horrible guy. Why do you keep working for him? And they answered, well, from time to time, he really can fly.
Ryan, do you want to add something on the flying
thing? It's a terribly hard act to follow. So I'll throw you an easy question. I interviewed a man 2 weeks ago who was also a YouTube sensation, who was also doing a tour to get in touch with the people and take a message out to a much wider audience, and his name was Nigel Farage, and he is the face of that horrible populism that you can't stand. So tell us how you are going to be popular but different from Nigel Farage, despite sharing those attributes.
Oh, by telling the story of Europe, and by from time to time picking up the fight with him. Because nobody picks up the fight with him in the parliament. I do it from time to time. I said to him, it's on YouTube. I said to him, you know what the biggest waste is in Europe? No, he said, by paying your salary. That's the biggest waste.
So last question. A prominent European leader recently said off the record that there were two extremists in Europe. At one hand, there is Marine Le Pen, and at the other hand, there is Guy Verhofstadt. Are you an extremist?
Well, if Schuman is an extremist, if Monet is an extremist, if Paul Rispaak is an extremist, if De Gasperi is an extremist, I'm also an extremist.
So we're going to stay here, to end this evening here. Just to remember you that the book Guy Verhofstadt, de ziekte van Europa and de herontdekking van het ideaal will be translated in English and in French in March.
Yep.
Yeah, and all around the world then. We are looking forward for your film because it's very interesting to see how you are going to translate. But
it can be a very short YouTube film, done by my son and myself, maybe something like that. But we're going to make a film, but it can be an amateur YouTube film. That's also...
So it's just the beginning of something. So I forgot to say that you dedicated your book to Von Brentano and Paul Rispaak.
Yeah, maybe to explain. So Heinrich von Brentano, nobody knows him anymore, but it was a German politician, CDU, in fact, colleague of Adenauer, and he was also responsible for the constitution in Germany, the basic law in Germany, and then he wrote that new constitution in 1952-53 for Europe with 25 other people. And one of them was Spinelli, and that under the umbrella of the assembly of the 6 member states. So that were the 70 represented, and the chairman of that assembly who approved that that constitution was Paul-Henri Spaak. And that's the reason why I think that there are 2 men who saw already the light in '53, and unfortunately they didn't succeed. But we can always try a second time. Thank you.
So we want to
thank you.
We want to thank you because it's because of your presence and your attention years ago for the first book with Mr. Cohn-Bendit that le BOZAR, Nouvel Observateur le Soir, decided to organize les Journées de Bruxelles. And they are very important. This year it will be on the 18th and 19th of November. The title is Europe Last Chance, with a lot of people, and Mr. Juncker will come this time, and he will answer the question only of the public. It's sort of grand oral of Mr. Juncker, the 18th of November.
And if he doesn't come, I shall replace him as commissioner.
Like always. And there is a reception at La Salle Horta, and there is a possibility for a book signing. So I let you go now to meet Mr. Verhofstadt. Thank you very much.